Member for Nepean.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to make a contribution on the Gambling Regulation Act the Gambling Regulation Amendment Bill of 2023. And I want to thank, first of all, the member for Gippsland South for his work that he's done on preparing this, as well as the contribution from the member for Gippsland East and his thorough knowledge of the racing industry, and the member for Sandringham for his work on the Gambling Taxation Bill, which we're going to obviously talk about later in the week. And I don't want to preempt debate, but these bills are very closely related. Now, this bill amends the Gambling Regulation Act of 2003 to allow the government to issue more than one wagering and betting licence, and removes the requirement for the racing industry to receive no less favourable treatment under the new wagering licence. The Victorian Wagering Betting Licence allows the licensee exclusive rights to conduct several gambling activities, and it's basically the modern equivalent of the old tab. And for those that don't know, my old man actually ran a TAB for 10 years, so I'm very, very familiar with the way that works in the racing industry. And we know that this is going to expire in August 2024, and that Tabcorp paid about $410 million to the government up front in 2012 for this licence. Now, the primary purpose of the legislation is to allow the government to issue more than one wagering and betting licence, and the 29 pages pretty much go through changing a lot of the words "the wagering and betting licence" to "a wagering and betting licence," and it affords the Minister important flexibility when it comes to the awarding of these licences. But I guess the government hasn't fully explained the potential issue or arrangements around the concurrent issues of multiple licences, and the new legislation will allow for the issue of multiple licence to any number of licensees, and we know that process is ongoing at the moment, and the second reading speech indicates there may be exclusive agreements for some licence periods. For example, when we heard the member for Eildon mention it, the 10-year exclusivity in a 20-year licence. But the exact arrangements around how many multiple licences will we manage haven't been fully explained, either through the briefings that we've had or through the second reading. And it's important for this conversation for industry to have, because we need to have a full understanding of this new commercial landscape. We've heard a lot about, and I know the Minister for Racing touched on it, the racing industry has entered into a confidential memorandum of understanding with the government. And unfortunately, up until this stage, the government has been less than forthcoming with those details, and we were advised in the briefing that that had been entered into. And look, we understand these things are confidential, but I think the public, the taxpayer, deserves to know what exactly the agreement that the government has entered into with the racing industry. And we also understand that this memorandum of understanding guarantees the racing industry at least 90% of its current level of funding, but they have not confirmed, the ministerial staff which we spoke to haven't confirmed any other details of this agreement. And it leaves significant uncertainty around the insurances that are being given to the industry and what facts we can rely on when assessing this agreement. Now, we know the bill, as well as we mentioned, seeks to remove the no less favourable clause from the legislation, and this is an accepted change by the industry. Although on its face this seems like a negative change for the industry, seeing as they may only get up to 90%, it does not reflect the new commercial reality in the wagering and betting marketplace. And this change has been accepted by the industry as a necessary step in the broader reforms that will take place in licensing across the sector. One of the big points that's been brought up in this debate, though, is in relation to the intellectual property that Tabcorp currently holds. And you can understand someone the size of Tabcorp would love, I'm sure, to hold on to the licensing. I'm sure it's a big profit maker for them, and they've got a great arrangement with the racing industry. But there's a big dispute right now over the ownership of Tabcorp's customer data and whether this should be connected to the current licence. Tabcorp, of course, refusing to release the data to the new licensee, which has forced a couple of the players to sort of question where they want to stay in that, and we've had an understanding that at least one player has already dropped out because of this data and the question around the IP ownership. And I think that it is actually fundamental to the bidding process and also to the people of Victoria to know whether their data is going to be shared if a new licensee comes on board, or whether Tabcorp's going to hold on to that. And I think that should also be reflected in the price that is paid probably for this new licensing. The racing industry is they're always continuing to improve and adapt, and I think we've got to recognise the changing commercial conditions that they're dealing with. They've had to adapt in recent years with the welfare of horses and jockeys, and we know major initiatives like the Melbourne Racing Club's Foundation Stable Wellbeing Program in conjunction with Monash Link Health. However, as the industry adapts on all these fronts, they've also got to adapt to the changing commercial landscape around wagering and betting. And the realities are reflected in some of the changes made by this bill and are accepted by industry as part of the changing face in Victoria. I know we're going to touch on, and I don't want to preempt debate, but the other bill that will come across and the increase of the point of consumption tax from 10 to 15%, and how 4% will go back to the industry and 1% back into the government's consolidated revenue, and we understand that will go back to industry and hopefully covers off some of that drop in revenue that could come from the 90% no worse off for the industry. And we also understand the government has to maximise its income from this process, but it's really no excuse not to provide the market and the taxpayer and the Victorian people with the basic important details and the things that we've been missing so far. So while on many fronts the government can maximise the licence, I don't think they're considering some of these things at present. And I think the other thing to note is around the intellectual property is at the moment, and we heard the member for Gippsland East touch on this, that a lot of the bookmakers, currently the other licensees, the other corporates, take their odds on the exotic bets straight from Tabcorp. And has that been included as part of the licence? Are they going to need to pay a fee to take that intellectual property around, what gets paid out on a trifecta or a Quinella? I think there's still a lot of questions around those parts of this bill that have not yet been answered. And I did think that the member for Gippsland East made a great point. I don't know if anyone here bets, but when you do go into a TAB, you can turn on venue mode. With everyone betting now on their phones, with so many different bookmakers, you could log on now and have a bet while you're sitting here in Parliament. Hopefully no one is. I know the member for Mordialloc liked to think that we were checking the odds on what's happening on our side, but there's a few there's a few other important matters at hand. But whether that actually needs to be looked at, the exclusivity around in-venue betting for some of those online bookmakers as they move forward. I'm not sure. You might know. I'm not sure if you've looked it up. There. Oh, geez.
Through the chair.
Look, on the wider industry front for racing, there's a couple of points. We know this 90% of revenue. Look, the government's going to stump up the 90%. I think the extra 1% that we'll discuss tomorrow will go back into industry. We'd like to see it go, obviously, into consolidated revenue for hospitals and schools and roads, the things that we're currently missing out on. But I think it will end up going back into the racing industry, just because when this licence is signed, because of the way the betting market has changed over the last period of time, this licence cannot be worth as much as it was in the past. People are gambling in a different way. I think overall the bill covers off a lot of these things. Look, we're not going to oppose the bill, and I know the member from Mordialloc made a point, why do we bring up all the negatives? I think it's our job to scrutinise the bill and go over it. And while this bill is widely supported by industry and we won't oppose it, I think there is a few questions around the intellectual property with Tabcorp and how that's going to manage, and just making sure the Victorian people get the most out of this that they can. And we don't want to see either the industry, which supports so many jobs right across this state, or the Victorian taxpayer miss out. So, look, overall, I think it's a great bill. We won't be opposing, and I just want to thank everyone, including the member of Gippsland South, for his work that he's done on this bill so far.